Welcome to section 6.4 part 2. You already saw section 6.4 part 1, hopefully. It was about the cranial nerves, and then you would have had worked on your quiz for that section as well. So in this section, we're going to talk about spinal nerves and nerve plexuses. So let's get started. All right, let's talk about spinal nerves. There's a couple things I want you guys to remember as we go through this. One is that you actually have 31 spinal nerves that make up your vertebrae, and they're going to come out either from the left or right of your spinal cord, and then you are going to have them named depending on which part of the vertebrae that they're coming out of. So if they're coming out of your cervical, they're going to be named according to that: thoracic, lumbar, or sacrum. If you remember, your spine kind of looks like this. You have your cervical up here, which is pretty much makes up your neck. Your thoracic, like your upper back. Your lumbar is your lower back. Your sacral is the pretty much the lowest part of your spine, and then it ends up with your coccygeal, which is all the way at the bottom, pretty much where your tailbone's sticking out of. So in these regions, you have 8 spinal nerves in your cervical part of your vertebrae. You have 12 in your thoracic, 5 in your lumbar, 5 in your sacral, and then 1 in your coccygeal. The way I remember telling you guys was that at 8 a.m. you have breakfast, at 12 you have your lunch, at 5 you have your dinner, and then maybe during your quarantine life you're having a pretty late midnight snack at 1 a.m. So that's just a fun way to remember. Okay, some other things that I want you guys to know about the spinal nerves is that the spinal nerves is a mixture of efferent and then afferent nerves. Remember that afferent has to do with your sensory nerves, okay? And then efferent is your motor, all right? And then remember that the spinal nerves are a mixture of these so that they have both motor and sensory. And then between the two vertebrae discs in your spine, you have something called the intervertebral foramina, which is basically where these nerves are coming out from or exiting from the spinal cord, okay? And then when we talked about the axon earlier this year, earlier in this chapter, we talked about how if this is my axon, these are my dendrites coming out, and then I have my axon coming this way, and then I have my terminal. So this is my cell body, or also called a soma, and then this is my axon terminal, and then this itself is the axon, and then the axon also has some myelin sheets that look like this, and in between the myelin sheets, like right here, are your nodes or Ranvier. But the cell bodies, which are also called the soma, which is right here, of the spinal nerves are going to be located in the gray matter of your spinal cord. If you see SC, it just means spinal cord. All right. So your soma is, or your cell bodies, which is, like I said, right here, this is going to be gray matter. And then your axons, okay, of the spinal nerves, they are actually going to be the ones that are protruding out of the spinal cord, and then they are also going to be connecting with your muscles. So the axons that you see that are coming out of the spinal cord are the ones that are going to attach to the muscles. Okay, so I wrote some extra notes here, so let's go through them. So spinal cords are actually pretty short. So if you actually, let me go back. So if you look at this picture that I have, you can kind of see a couple things. One is that here's your vertebrae kind of cut in half, and then you can see that your spinal nerve is right here. And if you see the spinal nerve right here, it's actually pretty short, right? It's very, very small, and that's because it splits into either your dorsal primary ramus or your ventral primary ramus. And these are important because they carry information either to the back of your body or to the front of your body. And then these are they carry nerve impulses, like I said right here. And then depending on where they're going, so the dorsal right here, they would carry your muscle and skin information or nerve impulses to the back of your body. Remember, dorsal fin of a fish is on the back. And then your ventral right here would carry nerve impulses to the muscle and skin of your trunk region in the front of your body. And then if you look at the dorsal root that I have right here, that just means that the dorsal is bringing your sensory information, and then your ventral root that I have right here is bringing your motor impulses. At the bottom here, I wrote down what the dorsal ramus and the ventral ramus are functioning as. So the dorsal ramus is functioning as carrying information to the dorsal trunk, which is the back, and then the ventral ramus is carrying information to the ventral trunk, which is in the front. Okay? So let's move on. Okay, so this is just going into kind of more vocab as to what I just kind of spoke about. So remember your dorsal rami, which is plural, they're carrying motor impulses to the posterior, which is the back, trunk, and then sensory impulses from the skin of your back to your spinal cord and your vertebrae and to all the other nerves. And then you also have your ventral rami, which is going to be located in the thoracic region of your spine, T1 to T12. T is for thoracic. And then they're also going to be running between your ribs, which is called the intercostal nerves. And then they're going to relay information with the muscles and the skin of your anterior and lateral trunk. So they're carrying information from your muscles and skin from the anterior part and lateral part of your trunk. Also with the ventral rami, you also have some that are located in the cervical and lumbar regions, and they are actually going to form something more complex. It's going to be a bunch of connections, and those are going to be called the plexuses. And we're going to go into what that means in a little bit. But so the major nerves that are efferent, which means that they're motor, that are going to be in the neck, arms, and then legs, are actually going to be coming from the plexuses. All right, guys, let's talk about the autonomic nervous system. So the one thing I want you guys to know is that the autonomic nervous system obviously is controlling things that are automatic, like your heart rate, your blood pressure, your digestion, so on and so forth. So you're pretty much seeing how can we get from the CNS, which is your central nervous system, all the way down to the organ that it needs to communicate with. And how it happens is that there are two nerves. One nerve is going from the CNS to the intersection called the ganglion, and that nerve is going to be called the preganglion nerve. All right, now this nerve is going to start in the soma. So the soma is going to start in the gray matter of the brain and the lateral horn of the spinal cord. Okay, so that's where this specific soma is going to come from. Then you have the preganglion nerve that's going to go all the way down to the ganglion, which is right here, and that's where this preganglion nerve is going to be terminated. So this nerve that we see right here is going to start at the CNS starting point, and then it's going to go all the way down and stop right here at the ganglion, right? So that's why it's called the preganglion nerve. Then you have another nerve that is going to start at the ganglion, which is this one right here, and it's going to work its way all the way down to the organ that it's going to attach to, and it's going to terminate at the organ that the CNS is trying to communicate with. Okay, and so this nerve is going to be called the postganglion nerve. All right, and then so both of these jobs are to make sure that you're getting communication from the CNS, central nervous system, down to the organ, and it's done through preganglion, ganglion intersection, and then postganglion. Okay, so as a kind of review before we move on, remember when we talked about the central nervous system and then the peripheral nervous system? We can further break down the peripheral nervous system into somatic nervous system, which is controlling involuntary things, and then somatic is controlling voluntary things like your skeletal muscle, and then you have your autonomic nervous system, which is going to be all about your involuntary, so your digestion, your heart rate, your lungs, and so on and so forth. Autonomic is broken down further into two other nervous systems, your sympathetic and then your parasympathetic. Your sympathetic nervous system has to do with fight or flight. So if there's a threat, your body is going to say, okay, we're either going to fight or we're going to get out of here. We're going to run away. But then after this takes place, so after your threat is done, you've decided to fight or flight, your parasympathetic nervous system is going to kick in. And what this is going to do is it's going to start to get your body to calm down after the storm, and it's going to pretty much kick in your rest and digest factor. And so we're going to talk about what this exactly means. All right, guys, let's talk about the sympathetic nervous system more specifically. So in this system, like I said in the previous couple seconds ago, it is basically going to activate your fight or flight. So if you are exposed to a threat, full situation, your body is going to go into this mode of either fight to defend yourself or to flee the situation. And how this happens is that your sympathetic nervous system, which is what SNS stands for, it's going to stimulate your adrenal glands. And then your adrenal glands, in response, are going to release something called epinephrine. Don't get this confused with endorphins. Remember, endorphins are a good thing, like when you exercise and you get that runner's high or whatever, makes your body feel really good and kind of stops your pain receptors from feeling, depressed or achy or just not in a really good mood kind of thing. But your epinephrine is used for this kind of fight or flight situation that's happening. And another name for epinephrine is also known as adrenaline. So your adrenaline is kicking in response to this threat. And then that's just pretty much what I have written right here. Epinephrine usually is released in a threatening situation, but it's also released during stressful times. So back in the day when, stress really wasn't a thing because I personally believe times were simpler, and not really simpler that they didn't have troubles, but I think the way that they responded wasn't on social media and stuff like that. So epinephrine really was used during threatening situations, like during the war, during, just fight breakouts that were happening. But nowadays we have a lot of stress from either work or family or whatever it is, and epinephrine actually does start to kick in during those stressful times as well. Continuing on, so we talked about a couple of minutes ago about the preganglionic neurons and then the postganglionic neurons. And we talked about how preganglion neuron is coming from this central nervous system to your ganglion, which is like an web of, where your preganglion is ending and your postganglion is starting. So in this sympathetic nervous system, when we talk about preganglionic neurons in the sympathetic nervous system, they're actually going to come from your thoracic 1 all the way down to your lumbar 2 of your spine. So that's a wide range of all of your preganglionic neurons where they're starting to originate from. Because of their location, another name for your sympathetic nervous system is called thoracolumbar division. Basically thoracic and your lumbar region, so they just called it your thoracolumbar division. Okay, so make sure you know this other name for your sympathetic nervous system. Then, as we move on, your preganglionic neurons that are in this thoracolumbar division, they're going to secrete acetylcholine. And as they secrete acetylcholine, this is going to stimulate your postganglionic neurons in a location called your paravertebral ganglia, which basically means that these are parallel to your vertebral column. And as the preganglionic neurons secrete acetylcholine and stimulate your postganglionic neurons, those postganglionic neurons in response are going to release something called norepinephrine, which is also a neurotransmitter, and this is going to get your body and brain actually ready for that action to get moving. So if you're running away, flight, you are getting ready to run, or fight, you're also getting to respond to the threat that's happening. Parasympathetic nervous system is kind of the after effect of your sympathetic nervous system. So remember, sympathetic nervous system, I said, is like you're sympathizing with the situation. So your emotions are kicking in. That's why you're figuring out if you need to fight or flight. Your parasympathetic nervous system is going to come in pretty much after the storm, that I call it. So what they do is this parasympathetic nervous system is pretty much going to control your day-to-day functions of your body. So they're going to control your circulatory, respiratory, and digestive system on a daily basis and how they should normally be functioning. So another name that they give this parasympathetic nervous system is called your rest and digest system. So what happens is, first you have a threat and you are going to kick in your sympathetic nervous system to determine if you need to fight or flight. And then you're going to kick in your rest and digest, which is basically your calming. And you're going to figure out if you need to, or your body's going to be like, okay, we just faced a threat. Now we got to get back to normal. We got to return to homeostasis. And how are we going to do that? We're going to rest and start lowering your heart rate and lowering your blood pressure and stuff like that. So how this works is that your preganglionic parasympathetic nervous system is going to come or originate from your brainstem or the sacral region of your spinal cord. Remember, your sacral region is the lower part, so like right around here is your sacral region. And then another name that they give this system, this parasympathetic nervous system, is called the craniosacral division. Again, because it's either coming from the cranial, which is your head area, and then the sacral, the lower part of your spinal cord. And then as you activate your pre and post ganglionic nerves in the parasympathetic nervous system, this is going to cause them to release another neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. We talked about acetylcholine in how your nerves convey information in the axon terminals. Once you activate the acetylcholine, it's going to cause your skeletal muscle to move, which we know as the basic function of acetylcholine. So when we talked about acetylcholine a couple, weeks ago in class, we said that the acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft to trigger your muscle to move. But in this case, acetylcholine actually works in your parasympathetic nervous system because it slows down your heart rate and gets your smooth muscle to kind of go through a calming effect. It's kind of funny because some people, when you are really stressed out or in a very threatening situation, you kind of lock up because you're so focused and your body is going into that fight or flight. And after the calm has hit, after everything's kind of, the threat has disappeared, you're not stressed anymore, you start to feel your stomach get queasy, or you start to feel like you have to go to the bathroom for a bowel movement, or your headache starts to kick in. And that's because your parasympathetic nervous system has kicked in. And that's it for our slide. I hope you enjoyed this ending to 6.4. We will move on to 6.5 to finish chapter 6.